I'm Paul Carter, CEO of Pure Retirement. I'd like to welcome you to our three-part technical training course brought to you by My Care Consultant, designed to increase your knowledge of the care system. At the end of the course, you will not only have increased your understanding of the care journey that many of your clients face, but more importantly, how to advise them armed with the facts. In this training session, Technical Director Tony Miles and Jacqueline Berry, founder of My Care Consultant, will talk you through a typical care journey, highlighting what should happen and unfortunately what sometimes does happen to the detriment of the person in need of care. At the end of this session, you will have a better understanding of what your clients may be going through, how you'll be able to help them, and why it's so important they know that you can help them. So without further ado, I'll hand over to My Care Consultant to begin the session.
Hello, and welcome to the first of three technical training modules looking at care, brought to you by Pure Retirement. Today's session is entitled Client Care Journeys and the 5 Key Steps. My name is Tony Miles. I'm Technical Director of My Care Consultant, and together with my colleague Jacqueline Berry, we'll be spending the next 70 minutes talking you through the first of 3 training modules designed to increase your knowledge of the care system. We'll be talking primarily in respect of England, although we will make reference to significant variations across the UK and the availability of wider UK reference sources within our technical online service called Carebox. Hopefully, by recording these sessions, you'll be able to view and pause in a way that suits you and then sit back and watch each session in full. Either way, we hope they're helpful in increasing your understanding of the care journey many of your clients or perhaps their family members will go on. So the first thing I'd like to say is that My Care Consultant shouldn't really exist. It does primarily because the UK system is for most overly complex. It's very confusing for most and all too frequently inconsistently applied by those responsible, for example, the National Health Service and local authorities, meaning those in need of care and their loved ones don't know where to go for help when they have a care need, and they often don't get the information they should or the help that they are entitled to. Every day, we work with family members who've been struggling to find the care they think is needed, trying to understand things like eligibility to state support, whether from the NHS, their local authority or elsewhere, and not knowing who to talk to get the help that they desperately need. In practice, this results in many staggering blindly from one potential source of information or, unfortunately for some, misinformation to another, often at a time of urgent need for ongoing social care when being discharged, for example, from hospital. Something we refer to, not unkindly we hope, as the drunken walk. The lucky ones end up staggering into a source of good information, guidance and outcomes, and the unlucky ones don't. In this respect, it's a lottery, and frankly, in my opinion, a national scandal. So, what we want to do in this session is firstly take you through a typical care journey that many go through and highlight what should happen and unfortunately what sometimes does happen to the detriment of the person in need of care. And at the end of this session, we hope you have a better idea of both what your clients and their older family members may well be going through, how you might be able to help, and why it's so important that they know that you can. Now, this session might also help if you yourself have family members either now or in future in need of care. We'll then review the 5 main steps that most need to take at some point in time in their journey, and finally explain how you can support your clients or their family members on their journey to those good outcomes, regardless of the extent to which you're actually involved in giving care advice itself. Okay, so let's start by looking at the kind of journeys people go on when they first need care. Whilst for every individual and family, clearly their journey is unique, there are some common roads down which they will typically travel. Many people's first experience of the care sector comes from when they've been discharged from hospital, either then needing support at home or urgently having to find a care home or specialist residential care home that best meets their needs. Some simply find living at home without help becomes increasingly difficult, and they need to find support either during the day or sometimes throughout the night as well. Others who are already in a residential care home might find themselves in the upsetting situation of having to move care home because their needs have escalated. For example, they now need nursing care and their current home doesn't offer that type of support. Whatever the start of their specific journey, again, most haven't given much thought to it in our experience. They're unfamiliar with the steps they need to take, or for that matter, where to go for help. Now, as I just mentioned, for a significant number of older people, their journeys into care start with a stay in hospital, often the result of a fall or frailty rather than a specific illness. So let's spend some time looking at this. The problem often starts for them and their families, or for that matter, legal representatives, when they're discharged from hospital. For although there are measures in place to ensure safe discharge, the realization that social care is different from healthcare, that it isn't free, and that good care is expensive, and that for many they will need to pay significant amounts of money for it, comes as something of a bit of a shock. Most people in our experience simply don't think about the possibility of future care, or for that matter, how it will be funded. Each hospital has its own discharge policy, which should normally be available from the ward manager or the hospital's patient advice and liaison service. You'll often hear this referred to as PALS. However, for those being discharged from hospital from the 1st of September 2020, new hospital or national hospital discharge procedures have been introduced. These in effect formalize what has been happening for some time under the term discharge to assess, sometimes referred to as home first or safely home or step down. They're all the same thing. Now, discharge to assess effectively means that where people no longer require hospital-based clinical input and do not require an acute hospital bed, but potentially still require some services they could be provided with short-term funded support to be discharged from their own home where appropriate, or another community setting where assessment for long-term care and support needs is then undertaken. Essentially, what it was a response to the issue of bed blocking, the long-term occupation of hospital beds, chiefly by elder people, due to a shortage of suitable care elsewhere. So now this has been formalised with effect from the 1st of September 2020, with the National Health Service continuing healthcare assessments and local authority social care assessments taking place in the community, rather than what was the case in hospital. Anyone leaving hospital and requiring new care and support should be funded for up to 6 weeks, during which time their longer term care needs will be assessed and future funding determined. Now, whilst this makes sense from the perspective of hospital resources, it does increase the chances of people with care needs falling between the cracks and the families or friends of those being discharged having to ensure that immediate care is available for their loved one. Now, one can read the policy and operating model that should be followed by the NHS in the document on the right of this slide. Now, at the same time, NHS critical healthcare assessments restarted from the 1st of September last year, having been suspended at the beginning of the pandemic, including assessments that were put on hold due to the COVID emergency. It's probably no surprise to anybody that there's currently, and perhaps understandably, a significant backlog, causing delays and frustration for many. Once it's been determined that it's clinically appropriate for a person to be discharged, the current rules require the person to be moved to a designated discharge area within hospital. Now, discharge should happen as soon as possible and safe, usually on the same day, and in most cases to a person's own home with support where required, such as a care package. Excuse me. Discharge arrangements will be discussed with the person and their family representative before leaving hospital. They should be given leaflets explaining how this discharge works and clear information about how their needs will be assessed and what follow-up support will be provided. Now, the leaflet on the right of the slide is leaflet A. That's the leaflet to be shared and explained to all persons on admission to hospital. Now, the NHS recognises that issues of individuals' choice and engagement can often be significant barriers to hospital discharge where there are ongoing social care needs after discharge, particularly if moving to a residential or nursing home. The following leaflets, which I'm about to show, have been produced to support the communication of this message, and they're available for download from the website at the bottom left of your screen, as well as being available in 12 languages and in easy read format. So what I've just pulled up on the right of the screen is leaflet B. That's designed to be shared and explained to all persons prior to discharge. And this is split into a couple more leaflets. B1 is designed for persons who are discharged to their usual place of residence, and B2 is designed for persons moving on to further non-acute bedded care. B3 is designed for persons' family members or person who will provide care for them in all scenarios. Now, some people will require short-term and long-term residential or nursing care in a care home. People who have been discharged from hospital into a care home should now be tested for COVID-19 prior to their discharge. Any ongoing care and support needed after discharge will have been coordinated by the person's case manager before they leave hospital. This includes any medication, supplies, transport home, any voluntary sector support, and support for their immediate practical needs, such as shopping and turning the heating on. If they need care on the day of discharge from hospital, this will also be arranged by their case manager before they leave hospital. If they are discharged back into their own home, they will be visited either on the same day or the following day by a lead professional or multidisciplinary team to coordinate the support they need. Any necessary care and support should be put in place rapidly. If they have needs which are too great to allow a return to their own home, they will need to be given rehabilitation, short-term care in a 24-hour care facility or discharged to a care home for short or long-term care. And this again will be arranged by their case manager whilst in hospital. The diagram on your screen now attempts to bring all this together pictorially. It highlights what the NHS expects in terms of the needs of those being discharged based on their past experience. Put it simply, it expects 50% of people will be discharged to their home with voluntary and or some form of community support. 45% of people will be discharged home with up to 6 weeks of recovery, health and social services to maximize their independence and stay home longer. 4% will be discharged to community-based bedded rehab to support their return to home, and 1% will be discharged to a care home. However, I think it's fair to say that given these figures are for all age groups, the percentage of those being discharged into a care home or in need of significant domiciliary care will in all likelihood be much greater for those who are older. As mentioned, if you are discharged from hospital needing care or support, you should receive NHS funding for up to 6 weeks or until your long-term care needs have been assessed. And the government has provided additional funding to the NHS to cover the increased numbers being discharged due to COVID-19. And you might sometimes hear clients refer to this as COVID funding or the like. What is being referred to is NHS-funded reablement. Assessment of your long-term care needs, including continuing healthcare and social care assessments, should be completed within a 6-week period after discharge to determine your ongoing care and how it will be paid for. All decisions resulting from these assessments should be communicated to you within the 6-week period. If it takes longer than 6 weeks for these assessments to be completed, clinical commissioning groups or local authorities must continue to fund your care from their own resources. If your continuing healthcare or NHS-funded nursing care assessment is delayed, the clinical commissioning group must continue to pay for your care. After completion of these health assessments, if you're not eligible for continuing healthcare, then responsibility for funding your care will sit with the local authority until they have completed their Care Act-based assessment. Now, people with existing care packages who don't require new or additional care after discharge from hospital, they'll return to their usual care and funding arrangements. So, that's a brief summary of what should happen. Unfortunately, the nature of acute hospital care is such that sometimes that isn't what actually happens, and that people need support and clarification around what should have happened, and in some cases, I have to say, financial recompense. Okay, I think that's enough about client journeys and in particular being discharged from hospital. What we're now going to do is move on to the 5 steps that typically need to be taken by those when they first start their formal care journey. And I'm going to look into the first 2 steps on the slide, and then I'm going to hand over to the capable hands of Jacqueline Berry, who will take you through the remaining steps and then talk you through how all financial advisors can support their clients on their journey to ensure they get good outcomes. So the first step many people need to take is to get urgent care in place, often as just discussed following hospital discharge. Whilst the good news here is that in recent years, the range of care services has increased significantly, the downside of choice can be a lack of understanding as to which type of care is most suitable, how to determine what good looks like, as well as an appreciation that the care needs typically escalate over time for most and should be factored in as into decision-making as early as possible. For example, securing a place in a residential care home that doesn't offer nursing care or specialist care, for example, dementia care, can result in residents needing to move to an alternative home, which for many can be very upsetting, especially if they're happy with where they are and they've built a significant friendship circle. This can be even more upsetting where a couple are together in a home and one needs alternative accommodation. And whilst the Care Act 2014 underpins the concept of well-being in terms of care provision, unfortunately, at MCC, we are well aware of examples of couples being split up simply on the basis of changing needs in respect of one or the other. If it's not clear to an individual or family what someone's care needs actually are, it's always a good idea to request a local authority needs assessment to help establish needs, regardless of whether the local authority ends up paying for it. And everyone has a right to a care needs assessment, regardless of their financial status. For those of you who subscribe to Carebox, our online technical and business development resource in support of care advice, you'll find 2 relevant guides to help clients and their family members understand the care options open to them. The first is our consumer-facing guide on the left of the slide and an extract in the 2 middle pages, and it's called Your Guide to Getting the Care You Need, within which we've detailed some basic information about the various types of social care. The second is a comprehensive guide entitled Types of Care, How to Find It, and How to Know It's Right for You, and you can see that on the far right of the screen. Both highlight the differing types of care available so clients can appreciate the type of care that might suit them best. So once someone has understood their needs and the type of care service that best meets them, many can struggle to understand how best to assess what good looks like. Local council social services departments may be able to provide a list of their approved organisations in an area, And care regulators can also supply lists of local providers along with copies of recent inspection reports. Interestingly, the Care Quality Commission in England earlier this year acknowledged the faults within their current rating system and is consulting on introducing changes to allow it to assess and rate services more flexibly, so it can update its ratings more often in a more accessible, responsive, and proportionate way. When it comes to actually choosing a care home or home care provider, again, the challenge for many is knowing what questions to ask at the right time, especially when under pressure to find often urgent care. Now, this might seem obvious, but at times of urgent need and stress, it can often be a challenge to get oneself together mentally to just ask the right basic questions. This has, of course, been complicated hugely by the pandemic. And my care consultant has earlier this year updated its comprehensive checklist questionnaires for both care homes and home care with COVID-19 related questions, ranging from simple questions such as how often are your care workers tested, to more detailed questions such as, does the care provider have a robust and comprehensive coronavirus business continuity plan in place since the outbreak of coronavirus, and can we please see a copy? Again, those two documents on the screen are available in CareBox to our subscribers. So once someone knows what type of care they need and has a good idea of the type of service provider they're looking for, apart from using local knowledge and search facilities from the local authority or the Care Quality Commission, there are a number of independent search facilities that can be a pretty good place to start. Several are on the screen now. And at My Care Consultant, we have built up a good working relationship with care providers and are able to signpost and recommend accordingly. So, having found suitable care, the next step is to take is clarification in terms of funding. This is unfortunately not a straightforward matter for many who've had little to do with the social care system. For example, it's estimated in the UK that at any one time, something in excess of 100,000 people are incorrectly paying for their care. Just think about that for a minute. 100,000 people either paying too much or paying when they shouldn't have to. So the next step involves establishing the correct funding support by first looking at eligibility for NHS continuing healthcare. This is available in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland if someone has a disability or complex medical problem, and of course they pass the eligibility criteria. Critically, it's free at the point of need, is available in any setting, and covers all costs, including accommodation costs. This is why it's important to establish eligibility. It removes the need to pay for care, at least in the short term, as NHS continuing healthcare is subject to regular and periodic reviews. Now in Scotland, NHS continuing healthcare was replaced in June 2015 by what is known as hospital-based complex clinical care. And in that case, it is only available in a hospital setting. The pandemic did, of course, create issues via the suspension of NHS continuing healthcare assessments, and this has resulted in a significant backlog that the NHS is currently ploughing through. But as you can imagine, it's not unusual for individuals to fall through the cracks and simply miss out. From an advice point of view, it's critical that any possible eligibility for NHS continuing healthcare is explored fully. And at My Care Consultant, we're aware of cases where individuals have been subject to litigation because they have taken self-funders at their word and not discussed and explored the free alternative NHS continuing healthcare. And however unfair that might be from an advisor perspective, it's something that I think all advisors should take very seriously. So when it comes to how NHS continuing healthcare works across the home nations or complex clinical care in Scotland, There are individual differences, and again, these are highlighted in the care box summary sheets you can see on the screen. But what I'm going to do, however, is focus on England for the next few slides so you get an idea of what's involved. So let's have a look at the basics. Unlike social care, NHS continuing healthcare is free at the point of need. It relates to healthcare needs, not social care needs. Interestingly, healthcare needs are not defined in law, but the definition is set out in the National Framework for NHS continuing healthcare, which was revised in October 2018, excuse me, where it states, a healthcare need is one that, related to the treatment, control, management, or prevention of a disease, illness, injury, or disability, and the care or aftercare of a person with these needs, whether or not the tasks involved have to be carried out by a health professional. Now, this framework sets out a primary health need approach, which imposes an obligation on the National Health Service to provide care free of charge, and it applies where the individual is, excuse me, it applies wherever the individual is, whether it be in a local authority care home, in a private care home, or receiving care at home. Anyone aged 18 or over is entitled to an eligibility assessment if they reasonably believe they have a primary health need. And the NHS is under an obligation to undertake an assessment in all cases where it appears that there may be a need for such care. Helping clients understand their rights and how the eligibility process works is a key service from my care consultant. Now, as I just mentioned, how the NHS continuing healthcare should be delivered in England is set out in the national framework, a framework that's updated most recently in October 2018, and you can access a copy from the link on the bottom right of your screen. So I'll just leave that up there a minute if you want to take a note, although of course you can pause at this point if you choose to. So when it comes to the thorny issue of eligibility, the NHS continuing healthcare assessment is carried out in two stages. Stage one, by what is known as the checklist, and stage two, the multidisciplinary team meeting, which uses the sometimes called decision support tool. Now, the checklist is a primary screening tool to see if the individual would trigger a full assessment. And as such, the threshold is set intentionally low in order to screen people in rather than out. At least that's the theory. It can take place in any setting. Anyone can ask for a checklist assessment to be carried out, and it's typically done by a variety of health and social care practitioners trained in its use. For example, a registered NHS nurse or GP, or if social workers, care managers, for example. And as mentioned earlier, if being discharged from hospital, the NHS are now obliged to put an interim package of care in place until a checklist assessment is done to ensure no gap in healthcare requirements or no gap in meeting them. So the checklist has 11 care domain names, including things like continence, cognition, behavior, and others. And those care domains are broken down into three levels, level A, level B, or C, where A represents the highest level of care needed and correspondingly C, the lowest. And the outcome of the checklist depends on simply the aggregate number of A's, B's, and C's scored. And in order for the clinical commissioning group to consider doing a comprehensive full assessment, you have to have a minimum score in the checklist. And that basically is 2 or more at level A, the severest level, 5 or more at level B, or 1A and 4 Bs, or at least 1A in a domain with an asterisk, and there are some domains that are asterisks. I believe from memory, I think they are actually continence, cognition, and behavior. Having said that, that anyone can ask for a checklist to be carried out, it's worth pointing out that the NHS are not obliged to do a checklist under certain circumstances. So, for example, if it's clear to the professional involved that one isn't needed at the point in time, perhaps because the individual needs are obviously not healthcare related. For another example, the CCG agrees that the individual's needs are so obvious that they should be referred directly to a full assessment for eligibility for NHS continuing healthcare rather than go through the checklist stage. Another example where an individual has a rapidly deteriorating condition that may be entering a terminal phase that should be referred to what is called a fast track pathway assessment. Another example, an individual is receiving services under Section 117 of the Mental Health Act, which are meeting all of their assessed needs already. And then finally, the individual has short-term healthcare needs, which are expected to improve significantly with short-term rehabilitation. And in that case, it's reasonable to allow time to see how they recover rather than go straight to a checklist. Now, if a checklist is successful, they will proceed, or the NHS will proceed to a full assessment where the clinical commissioning group should arrange within 28 calendar days of the checklist assessment taking place. However, these timescales in our experience are rarely met, particularly in the current circumstances. Now, the multidisciplinary team must consist of at least 2 people from different healthcare professions, 1 healthcare professional and 1 social services professional. And the assessors must be properly trained in the NHS national framework and the assessment process. And they should be knowledgeable about your relative's health and social needs, and where possible, have recently been involved in their treatment or care. So, ask the assessors how they've been involved in your relative's care, what direct knowledge they have of their daily needs, what training they've had on the national framework, and their experience of other multidisciplinary team assessments. However, don't be surprised if this is their first multidisciplinary team assessment. It can happen. Now, a multidisciplinary team coordinator will be appointed by the clinical commissioning group, and they will lead the assessment process. Okay, we recommend that those being assessed take someone along with them who can take a note of what's being discussed, if you like, another pair of eyes and ears. Everyone is entitled to an advocate to represent them, and we strongly recommend that happens to give you the best chance, or to give an individual the best chance of success in terms of securing NHS continuing healthcare. Now, prior to the full assessment, the multidisciplinary team are required to review all the relevant care notes and medical records in relation to the individual's needs. So things like GP notes, hospital treatment records, that kind of thing. And the full assessment follows a similar process to the checklist assessment, but uses a decision support tool, or DST, instead. And the DST has all the same care domains as the checklist, plus 1 further domain for other requirements. So here's an overview image of the decision support tool. You may well have seen this before. Now, whilst the decision support tool scoring system isn't scientific by any means, generally speaking, someone should qualify for continuing healthcare funding if they score priority. That's illustrated with the letter P on the visual, in any of the care domains, or the 4 actually that have priority levels, or severe in 2 or more domains. However, they could still qualify if their scores aren't as clear-cut as this, as it is the totality of their healthcare needs that are being assessed. It's also worth noting that the NHS guidelines state that if there is uncertainty or disagreement within the multidisciplinary team about what scores to allocate, then the higher of the scores should be applied. And this is important to understand if faced with an ineligibility decision. So, once the full assessment has been completed, a report is sent to the clinical commissioning group in the person's area, and they make the final decision on whether someone qualifies for NHS continuing healthcare funding or not. It's not the multidisciplinary team who make the decision, although they will make a recommendation. And in most cases, it's expected that the clinical commissioning group will follow the multidisciplinary team's recommendations. The clinical commissioning group will send a written copy of their decision with a copy of the decision support tool and together with process for appealing. However, be aware that the NHS will undertake another full assessment after 3 months and thereafter annually, at which point funding may actually be withdrawn if the person's situation or condition has changed. If an individual has been turned down for NHS continuing healthcare following this full assessment, but they've other needs, including nursing needs, they may still be eligible for NHS-funded nursing care instead. And as it says on the slide, if following the full assessment, it's agreed that their care needs are not primarily healthcare needs, then they will move from care of the NHS into care of local authority social services, whose services are means tested. What actually happens in practice? This is an interesting quote that we came across recently, and I'll read it. Whenever we approached the subject of NHS continuing healthcare funding, we felt like we were being fobbed off by the system. We kept being told that my mother didn't fall into a certain category of health requirements and had assets in the form of the funding from the house sale, so we'd have to pay. We were simply told that's the law. We now know that this is not the case and that NHS continuing healthcare funding is based on health needs and not how much money you've got in the bank. As I mentioned earlier, it's estimated that at any one time over 100,000 people in the UK are incorrectly paying for their care. And in respect of NHS continuing healthcare, and the NHS can fail to undertake a continuing healthcare assessment, or when they do, it can be flawed and the eligibility criteria, incorrectly applied. So the quote that I've just read from the slide, it's unfortunately not that uncommon. Interestingly, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman produced a report in November 2020 entitled Continuing Healthcare, Getting it Right the First Time. And that highlighted the extent to which failings in assessing people's eligibility too often resulted in people and their families being forced to fund their care in error or being asked to top up NHS continuing healthcare, which shouldn't happen, as NHS continuing healthcare is designed to pay for all needs, including accommodation where relevant. So if you're in a state at the moment, or if you're in the process of maybe looking at the whole issue of NHS continuing healthcare for a family member or a loved one, it's well worth having a look at this Ombudsman's report, and you can find it on the link at the bottom of the screen. So, as I say, if you have a family member or a client or client family member in need of care where they have a complex medical issue, the key thing to remember is do not allow anyone to tell them that they are not eligible and that they do not have a primary health need. This is the technical term in play here, without the NHS having first conducted a continuing healthcare assessment. Too many people take no for an answer, and these types of rebuttals on the screen, amongst many others, are all too common, and they're simply wrong. No one can be certain that someone will be eligible or ineligible before an assessment has taken place. Furthermore, decisions must never be influenced by clinical commissioning group budgets or a person's income, their assets, or their overall financial position. The first comment, people with dementia don't qualify for funding, is an interesting one. I think it's worth a little bit further explanation. It's not unusual for NHS continuing healthcare to be denied on the basis that, for example, Alzheimer's disease isn't considered to be a primary health need. Now, whilst this is not the case, an individual with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia will still need to present their case effectively and against the criteria within the decision support tool used. So to lodge an appeal, if necessary, against an NHS decision to refuse continuing healthcare, one can also need to be aware and quote case history and case law where successful appeals have been made in the past. And it's these cases that create legal precedent and a guide for the conduct of assessments in the future. And some of these case laws actually relate to people who have won cases for NHS continuing healthcare where the person in need of care has some form of dementia. Okay, one last thing before I hand over to Jacqueline. Within a matter of weeks, we will be launching the latest of our consumer guides available free to Carebox subscribers alongside our consumer guide to care and our consumer leaflet Paying for Care. This latest offering is designed to help clients and family members get to grips with establishing eligibility for NHS continuing care. And in it, subscribers will find things like an overview. We've put down 12 key facts that everyone should know. What is NHS continuing healthcare? More depth look at the assessment process, how to increase chances of getting the right outcome, top tips to follow, how to challenge a decision, which we haven't really gone into in today's video. The relevance of legal precedent and sources of further information. You'll find in it as well an eligibility to NHS continuing healthcare flowchart, and also further information about NHS continuing healthcare in Northern Ireland, complex clinical care in Scotland, and continuing healthcare in Wales. Okay, that's it from me. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to Jacqueline, who will look at the third step clients should take, namely establishing eligibility to local authority funding. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and hand you over to Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Tony. I hope everybody enjoyed that first half of the session. I'm now going to share my screen. Okay, just bear with me. Won't be too much longer. Right, okay. Now, thanks, Tony. I hope that was useful for everybody. I'm now going to move on to step 3 of the process. So if somebody is not eligible for NHS continuing healthcare, the next step is to establish eligibility for local authority funded care. And this is done via a care needs assessment, which is followed by a financial assessment, because unlike NHS care, local authority care is means tested. So if someone needs help with everyday tasks, their local authority has a legal duty to carry out an assessment. And this is to find out what help they need. And in Northern Ireland, it's the Health and Social Care Trust who does this. So everyone is entitled to a free care needs assessment, regardless of how much income they have, nor how complex or simple their needs are. So the process of the needs and financial assessment has to follow is set out in law, and it allows an individual to take the lead in explaining what care and support they feel they need to make their life easier and to achieve the outcomes they're looking for. The individual's well-being and wishes must be considered throughout. So to get a needs assessment, one should approach the Adult Social Care Services Department of their local authority. And again, this is the Health and Social Care Trust in Northern Ireland. So in England, the national eligibility criteria is detailed on the screen. Local authorities have their own assessment procedures, but they follow a national criteria to decide who is eligible for care and support. Essentially, this involves a three-step process that starts with establishing whether care needs arise from a physical or mental impairment or illness. Eligibility is then determined by an assessment as to whether the person's needs mean that they're unable to achieve two or more of a list of outcomes, and then whether there is a significant impact on the person's well-being. So on the screen, you'll see the 3 steps on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, the list of outcomes to see whether somebody can achieve, is unable to achieve 2 or more. So for example, managing and maintaining nutrition, maintaining personal hygiene, managing toilet needs, being able to dress, and so on. After the assessment, if the individual is deemed to have eligible needs, 2 things should then result. Firstly, a care plan should be agreed with the individual or their legal representative, and a copy should be provided. This will deal with the needs the person has and what could help to meet those needs. Then there'll be a financial assessment to find out how much they need to contribute towards their care and support, and this is often referred to in the system as the means test. Focusing on England again, under Section 14 of the Care Act, the local authority may charge for any care and support services it provides, unless the person or their carer has been financially assessed as unable to make a contribution, or the services provided are those specified in the Care Act as services upon which a charge cannot be made, which include intermediate care and reablement services for up to 6 weeks, which Tony mentioned earlier, aids and minor adaptations if you're living in your own home, up to the value of £1,000, aftercare services and support provided under Section 117 of the Mental Health Care Act 1983, and if a person has been diagnosed with a variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is a brain condition. Now, it doesn't matter if a person lacks capacity to understand the financial assessment process or to make a contribution, they can still be charged. So how much can a person be charged? Well, the Care Act is clear about services they can't be charged for, but does not specify how much the local authority can charge or should charge a person or carer in a particular circumstance or for a particular service. Instead, the Care Act sets a minimum income guarantee amount, and the minimum income guarantee amount essentially is a minimum that it sees a person living in the community or their carer as needing for daily living expenses. Also, there's a personal expense allowance, which is the minimum amount that the local authority would see a person living in a care home as needing for daily living expenses. And thirdly, a national financial limit, and this is the amount of capital at which a person or carer is likely to be deemed able to meet the full cost of the services or to meet their care and support needs, or unable, of course, if they have less than the financial limit. So when it comes to residential care in 2021-22 in England and Northern Ireland, this upper capital limit figure is £23,250. In Scotland, it's £28,750, and in Wales, it's a flat £50,000. Now, I don't have time today to go into the details of the local authority assessment process, but they follow broadly similar criteria across all 4 home nations. And in the second module of this series of 3 modules, we'll be going into the local authority's treatment of capital and income to determine whether someone has to pay for their care in more detail at that point. And this is when I'll get into the nitty-gritty around the means test, what's included and what's excluded, and of course in what circumstances the local authority can determine that someone has deliberately deprived themselves of income or capital in an attempt to fall back on the state, known officially as deliberate deprivation of capital. Okay, so the next step is to ensure that those in need of care are claiming benefits to which they're entitled. Now, this is important for two reasons. Number one, where someone is self-funding their own care, where they have not met the bar for local authority funding, that is. Such benefits will provide some help towards the costs involved. And secondly, where an individual is receiving local authority funded care, the financial assessment will assess their finances as though they're claiming and in receipt of all the benefits to which they're entitled, whether or not they are doing so. So if they don't secure their benefit entitlements, in many cases, the individual will be contributing towards their care at a higher level than they should be. So the key benefits in respect of older clients in need of care include attendance allowance, and this is a non-means tested tax-free benefit for those over the age of 65 who need help because of long-term illnesses or disability. Personal independent payment, known officially as PIP, is for those below state pension age who have a disability or health condition and need help with daily living or getting around. Disability living allowance, known as DLA, which has recently been replaced by PIP, is for those who have extra care needs or mobility needs as a result of a disability. And finally, pension credit, which comes in two parts, and this is income related to tax-exempt benefit to provide extra money in retirement to those on low incomes. Now, we've recently created a simple one-page PDF for 2021-22 of the key state benefits and the care data. And you can download a free copy on one of the unlocked pages of Carebox. Now, the address to access this guide right now is on screen. So for anybody interested, I'll give you a moment to take a note of that. And of course, you might choose to pause your screen at this point. Now, some of you may be familiar with Just Group's annual State Benefit Insight Report. The reason I'm flagging this up today is because it highlights the reality that we at My Care Consultant encounter daily, where many people fail to claim the benefits to which they're entitled. This can be significant. So, for example, in the case of attendance allowance that I mentioned earlier, someone claiming the higher rate will be entitled to £4,659.20 per year. And as I just said, that's not means tested. So according to Just's 11th State Benefit Insight Report, shockingly, more than 4 in 10 eligible pensioner homeowners are failing to claim any benefit. £830 a year of benefit being lost by homeowners failing to claim, and a further 2 in 10 are underclaiming and missing out on £702 extra income. Those figures are quite stark, in my opinion. Now, the final step in the process that My Care Consultant takes clients through when they're engaging with our services, and at which point we've concluded that they're going to have to pay for some or all of their care. And this is the next step. It's to explain the 9 ways that care can be paid for, and as well, the existence of immediate needs care annuities, which I have to say tends to be a total surprise to most who have not heard about this insurance before. And we also explain the critical importance of taking qualified financial advice at this point. Now, to help advisors, we've recently created a 4-page consumer leaflet, which is on screen now. And this leaflet is ideal to send to clients or share with professional connections, such as care providers and solicitors, to help you ensure that people at the beginning of their care journey understand the value of obtaining financial advice as early as possible and know where to go to access it from your service. So this 4-page booklet is exclusively available to paying CareBox subscribers who can download it and email the guide to clients. Now, they can also request up to 20 free hard copies of the booklet, and these are completely free of charge, delivered straight to your door. And at this point, I have to thank Pure Retirement for making that facility available. And thanks to Pure Retirement also for supporting my care consultant in bringing this leaflet to market. Okay, well, that's all that Tony and I wanted to say today about the 5 key steps. But of course, in practice, some people may not need to take all of the 5 key steps. So, for example, those who don't have a primary health need and who potentially may be relatively well off. For example, they may not qualify for NHS or local authority support. These people will probably only need help with steps 1, 3 and 5. For those who are already in receipt of NHS and local authority support, both will be reviewed on a regular basis, so they may need support at the review points in future. All I can say at this point, without fear of contradiction, is that many are crying out for support and help in respect of some or all of these steps on screen. And as trusted advisors, you have a significant role to play in ensuring that your clients and their family members get the help and support they need at the time they need it, which can often be a distressing and stressful time. So remembering the drunken walk slide that Tony mentioned at the beginning of the session, unfortunately, this is the reality for far too many people, and it really does need to change. So what can you do to help? Well, it might sound obvious, but just make your clients aware that you can help. So if you can offer care advice, do your clients know you can? Do you make all your clients aware of your services when you're doing, say, a review or at an initial meeting? Do you run local awareness seminars for clients and their families or friends? If you offer unregulated care advice in-house, so this is the first 4 or 5 steps that Tony and I have discussed today, do your clients know about that? And if you only offer regulated paying for care advice and not unregulated care advice, do you have collateral that will help early in the client's journey? For example, a comprehensive guide on the issues, detailed checklists in respect of the questions to ask when choosing a care provider? And have you established a referral process with a care navigator like my care consultant? Whatever the answers to these questions, my care consultant has established an advisor toolkit within our online service called CareBox. And some of you watching today will already be subscribers. Thanks for tuning in. And CareBox is specifically designed to help with some of these points I've mentioned just now. The Advisor Toolkit section in CareBox provides extensive support material for 4 categories of advisor. Category 1, those who don't get involved in care advice but want to react positively to any inquiries or identified client needs in this area. Category 2, those who want to start giving advice in this area but need initial support to create an effective proposition. Category 3, those who occasionally give long-term care advice but are aware of the risks involved and want to minimise these as well as ensure the advice they give is profitable. And category 4, those who actively give care advice. So within the resource packs we have created, you'll also find a bespoke guide for each category explaining how my care consultant can help. And whether this be by consumer-facing material or the establishment of a referral service into my care consultant for non-regulated advice, for example, or how to establish a full-blown referral service for both non-regulated and regulated paying for care advice. The Advisor Toolkit is there to help. So if you're not a subscriber to Carebox already, please go online and take advantage of a completely free 1-month trial. No payment details required. We just need your email address and you'll have total access to all resources with the exception of the consumer guides that essentially are only available to paying subscribers. So if you want to go straight in and take out a subscription, you can do so with the following link on screen. You might want to pause your screen just to get that link. And when it comes to My Care Consultant's referral service, you can find full details on the My Care Consultant website, www.mycareconsultant.co.uk/refer. And as you can see, we have our referral client form on screen, which you can use to refer clients to us. So how does it work? Well, it's really straightforward. So you can send your client's name and contact details to the help desk using this form that I just showed you. Alternatively, you can email ask@mycareconsultant.co.uk or call us on 0203 290 3110. If you prefer, your client can call us, and it would be very useful if they quote your name, but we will always ask them how they've come to contact us, if they've been referred, and if so, by who. We will then hold a free initial 15-minute introductory call with your client and their family, if relevant. And from there, the client will have the option of choosing one of our chargeable services, either a telephone consultation for £195 or a bespoke care report for £395. But at this point, I must point out that is completely optional and there's no obligation to proceed with a chargeable service following the initial 15-minute introductory call. We'll then refer back to you following your client's free initial introductory call to let you know if they're proceeding or not. Following the free initial 15 minutes, if your client wants to proceed with one of our chargeable services, we will ask them to complete a fact find, and telephone consultations will be usually scheduled within a few days, whereas reports can be completed within 10 calendar days. If your client will then be self-funding, we'll of course refer them back to you at the right time to receive a recommendation about how best to pay for care. Finally, if you don't hold the necessary qualification in respect of providing regulated paying for care advice, we can refer your client onto a SOLA accredited advisor for a paying for care recommendation, and usually there's referral fee arrangements there for you. But of course, we will always speak to you first and will not make any referrals without your consent. Or of course, if you prefer to make those introductions with SOLA, then you can. Okay, so that's it from us today. Today we've covered the theory and the practice in respect of typical care journeys undertaken by those in need of care and their families. We've reviewed the main steps involved, the key 5 steps, and hopefully we've appreciated how all financial advisors can support their clients on their care journeys to help them get the important care they need and deserve. Thank you very, very much for tuning in today. Both Tony and I have enjoyed the session. We hope you have too. And we very much look forward to dealing with you and working with you in the future.